Hey guys, Chris here, and here we go again. Another tier list for War of the Visions, but this time we're talking about all of the non-UR units in the game up to this point. And unlike the UR tier list, we aren't going to dive into every single unit because there's just so many. So instead, I'll try to highlight some of the best units from each tier. There really are some great MR and SR units in the game, so we'll go ahead and talk about which ones make the best investments. Remember guys, this list doesn't define any absolute rules for units. Any unit at level 99 will at least be somewhat useful in some part of the game, but we value versatility above all else. Alright, firing up the ranking machine here, let's talk about how these unit tiers for this list vary greatly from ranking UR units. First, the Behemoth tier are units that can actually replace UR units altogether for lots of different circumstances. So these units straight up can compete with URs in a lot of different game modes, despite having lower rarity. Tonberry tier units are ones that can be better than some UR units in specific teams for specific events, or if you have the correct gear and vision cards. For MR units in these top two tiers, I actually could endorse spending daily hard quests to farm shards for these units. Chocobo Tier units are those that when maxed out might replace UR units in extreme circumstances or be good fill-ins for things like the tower, but you probably rarely ever use them in things like PvP or brutal difficulty events. Lastly, the Cactuar and Moogle tiers are units that I really can't recommend like ever because they just aren't going to be worth spending awakening materials on. Okay, now that ground rules are out of the way, let's take a look at the Moogle tier, and there's really not any surprises here. All of these units are pretty terrible overall, and there aren't any really notable TMR gear here to speak of either. I really want to like Durando more from this tier because his job combination really doesn't seem that bad, but he just seems to disappoint over and over again. Katia, Mariluk, Serge's, Yuna, and Liarte are just total trash tier though, and it's into the garbage chute with all of these units. Next up we have the Cactuar tier, and again, it's really hard to endorse investing in any of these units at all. There are a couple of units I want to highlight though. First is Naiah, because she can be a useful tank when fully built out, but one problem with her kit is that she has to run the Paladin sub-job to tank, which is her only use really. The other main problem is that Mont is as good or better than her at pretty much everything, and he's completely free, so it's hard to endorse any investment in Naiah, which actually pains me really bad to say. Etra is also notable here as well. Her TMR gear is actually pretty decent, but she's almost entirely useless in combat. Mia and Zazon wrap up the conversation on this tier, and just because they have the thief abilities, people have been over-ranking them in the past tier lists. The issue here is that there's just so many better units now that have the thief sub-job or main job that these two are no longer very unique, and I can't recommend investing into Zazon unless you're doing a casting call for the sequel to Old School.
Sorry, we're going streaking through the quad and into the gymnasium. Come on, everybody!
Okay, let's throw up the Chocobo tier here, and these will be units that might actually fit into your top teams in very specific circumstances. So there's a lot of units here that will be pretty good in combat when maxed out and in the right teams. Ramada, Lilith, Seymour, and Schutzelt being perfect examples of units that can be competitive in the right teams and have great job combinations overall. Then we have units like Vadim and Vistralle, which can be okay in combat, but have access to the Thief main job, so Steel Heart and Steel Time, and both have decent TMR gear as well, so they make it into this tier as units you might want to invest in if you don't have better, higher rarity thieves already. However, if you already have units like Giza, Victora, or Yerma, I might look elsewhere. Helena is a unit that's a bit underrated. Under that bonnet, she has Time Mage and White Mage sub-jobs, which can be pretty useful, and her TMR gear provides a huge TP buff, which can be amazing for certain units in certain events. Lastly, let's talk about Vallaide. Basically not that great at all, but he has access to full life on the White Mage sub-job, so he can drop into tower and be absolutely clutch on your main team, so for that reason alone, I could potentially see an argument to invest into him. Now let's throw up the Tonberry tier, and again, these are guys that can actually compete with UR units for certain events or in certain compositions, and you'll find yourself using these units much more often than you thought you might. So let's start off with the SR units in this tier, and Naiah is the perfect example of an SR unit that you could make an argument for. She has access to full life, Curaga, and Holy all on her main job, which is enough alone to warrant throwing her in for tower or with your top teams as a primary healer. Sosha is an example of a unit that in the right composition can be really good. She's got the Dragoon main job with the Ranger sub job, so she does great damage, has sharpshoot, jump, and with a good Tetrasylphid card can be a decent wingman or wing woman to Lucia in an all-wind team. Lastly, you could say Phoebe is worth maxing out just for her TMR gear alone, but the fact that she's a time mage and can use haste and quicken, or you can sub white mage for full life, she has a ton of versatility for an SR unit and no doubt is worth it if you're looking for investments at the bottom of your roster. Now onto the MR units. Adelard is basically a mini Miranda and especially useful when his full ability board is unlocked. Y'shtola is a solid mage unit with a huge AoE, and best of all, she's free too, so when Final Fantasy XIV event comes back, be sure that you pick up max shards for her. Fina is actually much more than just her faith buff. She actually has access to full life, Isuna, Curaga, and AoE abilities all on her main job, and with a maxed out rune bow can be really good. Grace is a mini Whisper. I mean, just look at these resistances here, but even without the proper vision cards and gear, the White Mage main job with full life, Holy, and Curaga makes her extremely useful. With the proper cards and gear, you can actually make her almost completely immune to magic, so she's got that going as well. Lastly, Dario, and I really struggled with this one because he's right on the cusp of being Behemoth Tier. The problem is that most players already have a UR tank, and I have a hard time recommending any MR tank over Mont just because Mont is free. That said, Dario can function really well as a magic tank, so he can fill in nicely to swap out against magic content in either PvE or PvP, and of course he has the ninja sub-job which provides great benefits to stats and support abilities. Finally, the tier we've all been waiting for, and that's the Behemoth tier, and by process of elimination you already know who's up here. These are the units that in a lot of circumstances can flat out replace UR units in both PvE and PvP content. For the SR units first, Severo is a unit that might actually surprise some, but I've seen some great testimonials for Severo, and I'm all on board. His damage is actually very competitive as a caster, and he has access to jamming thrust on a sub job without sacrificing too much. That said, he's squishier than a flan on a hot summer day, but if I had to recommend an SR unit to invest in, you could do a whole lot worse than Severo. You could also do a whole lot worse than Murmur. If Grace is a mini Whisper, Murmur is a mini Grace. Jamming thrust on the main job, flare and drain on a sub job, and like her Magicite sisters, with the right gear and cards you can make her almost impervious to certain attack types. Another SR unit that you can definitely get some run out of. Okay, moving into the top 5 here, and let's start with Rairyuu. Just being a gunner and his stats alone, he competes somewhat with Frederica, which is pretty high praise for an MR unit. This, and he has the Thief sub-job, which make him both deadly in combat and versatile for PvE content. Also, his Trustmaster gun is actually pretty decent if you're behind on building your Ras Al Gethi. If you're a player without Frederica or Lucia, Rairyuu is actually a pretty suitable fallback as a top tier gunner unit. Next to the man that needs no introduction, and that's Mont, and I've been preaching Mont since the launch of the game, and if he weren't a free unit, he would still be Behemoth tier. He suitably functions as a top tier tank with access to DPS abilities as well. The fact that his shards are free makes him the single best investment at the MR tier and probably in the entire game for all players. Everyone should have a level 99 Mont, end of discussion. Alright, let's talk about everyone's favorite assless tights lady, and that's of course Shadowlynx. Her speed, mobility, evasion, and moderate damage, all this stuff alone is enough to endorse investing in her, but she can also help with chaining and slash combos. At level 99, you'll hardly even notice that she's an MR unit and not a UR. Okay, let's talk about Salire, or Salire. I'm not entirely sure how to say her name, so anybody in the comments, let me know the official pronunciation. But she's absolutely a devastating caster unit for being an MR. When maxed out, her magic stat is fairly competitive even with the UR casters, and this doesn't even count her master ability, which adds another 20% magic and 15 magic attack. And with all of that, she also has the White Mage sub-job with access to raise and incredible heals, and the Ninja sub-job as well with great stats and support abilities. Until we get a UR Lightning Mage, in my opinion, she's currently the best overall investment for a non-UR unit in the game. That said, you could also make an argument for the last unit we'll talk about, and that's Gaffgarion. Final Fantasy Tactics is about to come back, so everybody in the game should have enough free shards to max them out, and you absolutely should. Simply put, Gaff will be as good of a DPS unit as almost every UR currently in the game. That attack is no joke, and he also has increased critical damage, HP drain with Shadow Blade, and buffs to evasion and Man-Eater. Best of all, he's a slashing unit too, so he works really well in slash chaining comps. Incredible value all packed into a free unit. So that's it, guys, the entire list for all of the non-UR units in the game. I definitely struggled with a few of the units here, so let me know in the comments section below what you guys think and what units you guys have invested in lower rarities that you've actually got some good run out of. This list was extremely fun to make, and hopefully it helps you guys decide on lower rarity units to invest in when you're running a little low on those rainbow yarn balls. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.